Welcome to the Acts 29 podcast. Acts 29 is an organization and global network of churches that exist to plant churches worldwide. Now here's your host, Vice President of Acts 29 Church Planting, Dr. Adam Flint.
Well, welcome everybody to the Acts 29 podcast. I'm Adam Flint, and I'm here with Jim Essian.
Yeah.
How are you, man?
I'm good.
Good.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks you flew in this morning from Fort Worth, not Dallas.
That's right.
Got to get that right.
Yeah.
So,
Fort Worth is where the West begins. Dallas, we don't even really care.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, Jim is the pastor of Paradox Church. So let's just start there. Tell me a little story of how Paradox began.
Sure.
A little bit of your backstory. And
yeah.
And then I want to know why the name Paradox.
Of course you do.
mean, I'm at a church that has a weird name.
Yeah,
so,
of course. I'm old school Acts 29 at this point. 13 years.
Yeah.
And this was back, when we wwere picking weird names. Vintage church and
Tyler Jones.
Yeah, right. and Coram Deo and all,
Yeah.
So, the quick version of the story is that I grew up in a baseball home. My dad was in professional baseball, still is now for 6 decades. And out of high school, I signed to go play professional baseball as well. Played 8 years in the minor leagues. And then the Lord was, we were talking about this earlier, calling me.
Yep.
In very, many different ways that were confirmed and time and time again, but began to call me into ministry, and didn't really know what that was going to look like or why or how but that led us, my wife and I, to Fort Worth. She's from the area, so it's not we didn't throw a dart at a map, but even going to Fort Worth, didn't know why. It wasn't. We knew that the Lord seemed to be drawing us there, but not necessarily to plant a church. I didn't know.
So
church.
it wasn't baseball. It wasn't church.
No,
it
was just the Lord. It just was drawing us there. I can tell you the quick story. The quick story is my last year of ball was with the Tigers organization. I was here in Florida, and we stop in Fort Worth after the season for my wife to. She was starting a photography company, and she had a gig, and a car breaks down, so we end up staying in Fort Worth for 2 weeks. And then we drive back home to the Detroit area, which is where we were going to stay that off season. Right. And that's when the Lord began to draw me to maybe the idea of moving back to Fort Worth. So I finally tell her, and she said, "Yeah, I know." I was like, "Baby, God wants us to move to Fort Worth." "I know." "What do you mean you know?" She had wanted that. I said, "But what do you mean you know?" And she said, "Well, when we were in Fort Worth after the season was over and our car broke down, I prayed that if God wanted us here, our car would break down."
I love it.
And so I said, "That's
what
the
you thought
worst."
Was a giant pain.
I said, "That's the worst prayer anyone's ever prayed in their entire life." She could have said, "God, if you want us to move to Fort Worth, give us $1 million.
Give us a house. Yeah, whatever. Sure.
Give us a job."
Right.
We moved down. And longer story short, I ended up working at a church for a few bucks a month as a youth guy, because that's what you pay youth guys, a few bucks a month. And, somebody handed me
and by the way, youth guys, you want to make big bucks, just become a church planner. Then it's real pay raise.
Yeah. And somebody handed me a Mark Driscoll CD. And through Mark, obviously learned about Acts 29 and learned...
For all the Gen Zers, a CD.
Yeah.
It's this little round thing you put in and played music on.
Old technology. So I learned about Acts 29. I learned that you could plant a church. I didn't know that you could do that. But as soon as I learned that you could... I don't know where I thought churches came from.
I had the same exact thought when I was in my early 20s.
Yeah. They just... We're here.
It makes total sense, but you're like, they started somewhere, but I never thought they start somewhere.
Yeah, I didn't know where little baby churches came from. I just thought like the stork, you just kind of drop them off. I just didn't know. So I immediately knew that that's why we had moved to Fort Worth, was to plant a church.
Wow.
As soon as I learned that that's something you could actually do. And so flew up to Seattle for a conference in February 2008, met Darren Patrick. And then here we are.
Wow.
Yeah. So the paradox, the name, you asked me about the name.
Yeah.
I just was reading, back then, especially in my real theological formative years, just reading the Puritans, it was language, it was words that they would use around the many paradoxes and contraries of both the gospel. That a king would die for his people and not ask the subjects to die for the king, but the king. I came not to be served, but to serve and give my life as a ransom for many.
Yeah, kind of upside down kingdom.
The
all
upside
of
down
that.
kingdom. Yeah. Then you've got Jesus's teaching, like the last will be first, and the least will be the greatest, and so I'm in Fort Worth, Texas. Not really a churchman. We traveled growing up, so I didn't quite get church. Now I'm around church culture. And we're attracting and we're gathering and we're meeting with burnt out church kids. They grew up in church. They had already, deconstruction was happening way before the last couple of years.
Sure.
And so I was just I was gathering and attracting a bunch of deconstructed men in particular, ex-athletes, which is funny because when we launched our church, it was just a bunch of college students and artists, which I didn't know where they came from. But
it's your wife, the photographer.
I guess. And so we just paradox. It was almost. Adam, I didn't think this thing was going to actually work. I didn't think that it's going to end up as a monument sign in downtown Fort Worth on now a beautiful building that will hopefully be there for a long, long time. We had no idea that this was going to work. It was a conversation starter. Oh, I'm playing a church. What's it called? The Paradox.
Right.
What does that mean? Boom. Now I get to tell you the gospel.
Yeah.
Whether you're a church kid or not, I'm gonna be able to grab you with the gospel.
So let's go. You said deconstruction started long before it kind of hit the wave of the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And
the negative world has been around too.
Right.
Long before some people realized it.
We weren't going to talk about this, but let's talk about it. Let's talk about deconstruction a little bit.
Sure.
Because, deconstruction and apostasy are different things.
Sure. Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. But you saying, hey, we were dealing with this years ago. And I think anybody in ministry has been dealing with folks who go, I'm not sure I believe what I once believed.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean they jettison Jesus.
No.
And all of it. So how as a young church planner how were you seeing that? And then how were you engaging that?
So I definitely 100% learned as I went. I did not come into those conversations with Keller Center for Cultural Engagements,
Sure.
Understanding of anything. Right. It's just I had been grabbed by a theology. Well, first, just by a big God, and then a theology of that big God. Mm-hmm. I had been so captured by the fullness and totality of the gospel and all that it meant that I felt like when I'm talking then to a burnt out church kid or, I'm 26, 27, 28 at the time. I'm talking to another 24, 25-year-old who grew up in a church culture. I didn't grow up in a church culture, and I hear them talk about it. I can point out where, man, some of that sounds terrible.
I wouldn't follow that either.
That sounds like a terrible experience. And, that sounds like some flimsy theology, and my God's way bigger than that.
Yeah.
And so I didn't feel like I had to me, I think equipping in those ways is great, but just being a pastor that listens to actual humans is going to, I think you're going to be okay, led by the Spirit.
Sure.
I think you're going to be okay to have those conversations. But it's just, we should, deconstructing the church and things like that is good. We're reformers, for crying out loud. That's what we do. That's obviously different than apostasy. And so, but I even like the deconstruction of like our day now with what I learned from those guys back, again, 15 years ago, very similar in the sense that there was usually also always, I just said usually and then always. But it's almost always, you can imagine being a fight in me and marriage.
Works 80% of the time, 100% of the time.
But almost always there was sin.
Yeah.
And with the deconstruction of our day, it's, it's identity sin, it's sexual sin, it's license. But even in that day, it was that too. There's a sense of none of this is so neat and clean. Like, oh, just the church sucked, or oh, I just don't believe that what the Bible says about sexuality more, or
Right.
it's all intertwined and messy, and the enemy hates
Right.
us and doesn't
Yeah.
want the church to succeed.
And what I'm hearing from you, part of it is you didn't get scared by that or offended by that.
I was
and
too
back
dumb to
well,
be.
Yeah, but
Yes.
I mean, to your credit, you leaned into it.
Yeah.
And because of a big God theology,
Yes.
that gave you some courage in the moment, some
Absolutely.
compassion in the moment to
Absolutely.
step towards those people and not be like, well,
Yeah.
if you have questions,
Yeah.
bye,
Totally.
Yeah. And
I mean, it's a trite term maybe and could mean anything, but what you just said, I think is true. Without a big God theology, I don't think any of that, I would not have worked.
oh yeah.
I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't know how to have those conversations. And
Right.
that literally was the confidence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's such an important thing, especially as that becomes more and more a reality, or it's broadcast more and more. You hear
Yeah.
it's an opportunity in some respects
Yeah.
to share the gospel and evangelize.
It is. And, I don't know if you've had these conversations or thought about this with your wife, but me and my wife have, like, how I'm using this as an analogy, how terrible it would be to have to date in this culture. Like dating in this culture just sounds terrible.
Well, I mean, at almost 50, you're a little bit younger.
Yeah.
It's like, I've been out of this game for a while.
No, I know. It's just
yeah.
the culture has changed to where, like, dating just seems, I'm so glad I'm so glad I'm not 24 right now having to date and get married. To be honest, and I think it's probably harder to plant a church today than it was even 15 years ago. And I don't mean because the culture is so terrible, and that's not what I mean. I just mean that the complexities and challenges with where we are technologically, the information age that we're in, 15 years ago, well, I mean, people didn't love pastors, and we certainly weren't as respected as we were 50 years ago, but way less now.
Sure.
In the 15 years that I've been a pastor, I mean,
Yeah.
Abuse cover-ups and all that kind of stuff. So I would also say to any burgeoning church planter that it is hard. It's hard because it is hard, and it's probably harder now than it even was for me 15 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that kind of bleeds into we're recording this a couple weeks before your new book comes out. When this comes out, your book will have just hit. It's called Send.
Yeah.
And you've written a couple other books. I mean, you wrote Anchored, which was for your church, kind of a theological vision for your church. And then you wrote a few books before that.
Yeah.
But this one coming out this fall is Send, Loving Your Church by Praying, Giving, and Going. And so it's in a series of books. So tell me a little bit about, obviously you got asked to write this book, so there's a why, but what's the heartbeat behind Send?
Well, I think the reason why I was asked to write this one and why I so enjoyed it was because we've been able to multiply as a church, and we've just sort of. So again, going back to the early years, I was so ignorant to pastoral ministry and church planting that when Acts 29 said you have to be a church planting church, I took that seriously. And
sure.
And Ed Stetzer's like, you got to plant pregnant. And I mean, the first 5 years I was so frustrated because I couldn't get pregnant. Our church couldn't get, it was like, plant pregnant. It's like, how do you do that? I don't, and no, I thought that's what you're supposed to do, was be a church that plants other churches.
Right.
So, we just said that that's what we do. I just started saying that from the beginning. We're a church planting church. What does that mean? We're part of Acts 29.
Yeah.
We give 10%. We help coach other church planners. Even though we've been doing this for 2 weeks, we're going to help the guy that's not, at 2 weeks yet.
Yeah.
And so just from day one, we talked about church planting because, again, that's what I thought you were supposed to do. It is.
Right.
It is what you're supposed to do. But I think sometimes guys are, it's kind of like the conversations I have with a lot of young single dudes or even married people these days. It's, I'm not going to get married yet because I got to do this. I don't want to have kids yet because we want to get financially stable. And those are, of course, ridiculous reasons not to get married or to have kids. In the same way, to be involved in church planning, the time is now. Start now. So how did you do that in the early days when you're like, well,
we don't have a guy.
Yeah, totally.
Or we have 50 people. We don't have 50 additional people to send out.
Yeah.
Or we don't have a big budget.
Yeah.
Like, what did that look like for you?
Yeah, so we're currently a family of 6 churches, about to be 7, all local churches in Fort Worth that are loosely, connected as an extended family. Daughter churches that we planted, 5-10 minutes down the road. And how did we get there? So after the 4th one, that's when I started getting phone calls asking that same question. And I honestly would tell it sounds like false humility. It was just the truth. The thing I would say to everyone is, we said we would plant churches and then we prayed.
Yeah.
And I don't. The reason why I think that's important is A, that is what happened,
right?
But also B, I think you have to say something out loud. I mean, the sociological research around goal setting, you have to write it down. There's something about saying it out loud that all of a sudden now I am accountable to my people for this.
Yeah.
I've said we're going to do this.
That's the scariest part of church planning, right? When you go public with it, you're like, well, I guess we have to do it now.
We're going to do it.
It's all a dream.
Here's where 10% of our money is going. I mean, we just said we were going to do it, and we prayed, and we asked God to do it. So that really is the main reason why we were able to do what we were able to do. And then we, of course, walked in faith like you would with anything. We started residencies. We talked. We got. We grabbed people. Essentially, what we did is, with our first one, anyways, really all of them ended up being so regionally based that just a saturation of our small groups in a particular area. We'd say, oh, that look, there's a church right there.
Yep.
Do we have a leader? Is that a defined? That's a pretty defined neighborhood or area of Greater Fort Worth. That'd be great to plant a church there. Lord, provide for us. And so we did our best. I mean, none of our guys, if you ask Brad or Kanan or certainly not Jake or Ryan, if I did some great job of training them, that they would say no. They would say we got to be a part of a healthy church that championed us, trusted us, and literally opened their hands to take whatever you want, anyone and anything that you want.
Yep.
And so that's what we did. So our first church, Pastor Ryan, he was my first staff hire. He was my first elder. Still one of my closest friends. He went and planted Grace Southwest, took 110 people. We sent a whole band, and we sent, everything you needed.
Yeah. So I know this is kind of at the end of the book, the going piece. So we're kind of skipping the giving. We'll get back to that one in the middle. So, I mean, you touched on praying, but you talk about gospel goodbyes at the end of it and the going.
Yeah.
And people throw that out there, but what was that like for you to take that guy and a band and people you loved and bled with? And
that chapter actually was written out of my experience with Ryan. I mean, we were talking about just the old days in staff office. Like, we were just in one office with a Nerf basketball playing around the world and talking about life and ministry and leadership and all of that. And so, when he plants it, I mean, he's just 15 minutes away. He's not far, but proximity, man. I mean, when you don't see each other every day, things change. So no, there was a lot of grieving. The gospel goodbye is a chapter in the book just talking about, I think it's so important when we're sending missionaries, when we are planting, multiplying our small groups, all of that stuff is, there's an element of a gospel goodbye. You add a service. I mean, just even adding a service, and all of a sudden, man, we used to go to the same service together. Now you go to the 9 and I go to the 11.
Yeah.
That there's an element of multiplication and the grieving of that in all of that. And so, we talk about that in the book, just wanting us to acknowledge the grief, but then the joy. And therein lies another paradox of, a gospel goodbye.
Yet always rejoicing.
Exactly,
right?
exactly. Yeah, so I mean, back to the question about why I wanted to write the book. The way I've just described it is, I am an ex-jock preacher with no college degree, let alone seminary degree, and yet I've been able to be on the front lines of God's mission and see him flex in unbelievable ways. And so if I can be a part of it, then everyone else can too. And so the people in our churches, pastors, leaders that are listening to this, you want your people to be a part of God's mission. You long for them to see that, to be more a part of the kingdom of God than the kingdom of this world. And you want to, you've given your life to try to convince them of that and to find their place in that, and to realize that, they could actually plant a church, or they might be a missionary, or they could go serve in the city in crazy ways. They could be a leader in the church. They are a part of God's mission to I think Habakkuk 2:14 is God's vision for the world.
Amen.
With the knowledge of the glory of God cover the earth as the waters cover the seas. And so the book is meant to serve the church member. Here's God's mission. Here's what multiplication looks like in a church. Here's how you can be a part of that. And you're called to be a part of that. That's part of what it means to be a Christian.
Right. Yep.
That's who we are as a church, hopefully. Hopefully that your church is a multiplying church. But here's how you can find your place in that. And I think it serves them in that.
It's interesting because maybe you can speak to whether you've seen this or not, and I bet you have, which is a lot of times people say, well, if we give away those people, then we'll lose.
Yeah.
Or if they give their money over here, then, and nobody would really, very few would say that out loud, right? But inside they're thinking, man, certain
people are untouchable.
Right.
Don't take this leader, don't take this giver.
Right. But the opposite, I've seen the opposite to be true. The more open-handed you are, the more you give away.
Well, that's the law of the kingdom.
Sure.
I mean, that literally is what Jesus is describing as, it's more blessed to give than to receive.
Right.
It's the law of multiplication. Yeah, so I talk about that as well. Some churches and church leaders have a scarcity mindset, and some have an abundance mindset. And if we don't think that Jesus has all the leaders you need, all the money you need, and all the people you need in his back pocket, then I don't think you should be a pastor, let alone a church planter or want to start church planting at other churches.
100%. Like the old 1,000 cattle on a hill.
Right.
Does he have it?
Yeah. Either does or he doesn't.
Or he doesn't. Yeah.
Or if he has it, well, is he going to give it to you?
Right.
And right. I think God's going to give, in general, a general principle, I think God's going to give to those that will steward his stuff well.
Yeah. I mean, would you trust you? If you were God, would you trust you?
Would you give you more people?
That's right. Sure. But it is on a very sort of an experiential level. There is all right, Lord, we have to trust you in a way we've never trusted you before.
Yeah.
With these people, with these resources. But then what you see is God fills back those gaps. Mm-hmm. Like you lose the leader and somebody else has to step up now and fill back in.
Yes. So many benefits. I would say, there are, there's, I think smaller churches could easily say, how do I find my place in church planting? And I would say it only takes one just qualified man from your church to go multiply and plant another church. So of course you can be involved in it, and being part of Acts 29 obviously is another dozen ways. But I would say you want to. Tim Kelly's got a quote somewhere around if you don't have a multiplication culture and you go and plant a church, that's almost like, he uses a strong word. He doesn't use the word abuse, but something like that. It's almost just like you're gonna be whiplash your people. And so I do think cultivating the book is not just about church planting, it's about a multiplication culture. Are we sending people overseas? Are we multiplying small groups? When our college seniors are done, do we send them? Mm-hmm. Right? Is there a posture of we're sending you out now as missionaries? Right. And so do you have a multiplication culture? And I think a multiplication culture, if there's one thing maybe that we did well early on, even though we hadn't planted a church, is we were creating a multiplication culture. This is just normal for us to multiply things.
Sure.
And I think that's also really important for people for church leaders, church members, churches to recognize is the culture. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's the same thing for multiplication.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Which gets to one of the core competencies of planting a church that we talk about, and this is a little bit backwards from where we're going to go, but we'll go there, is godly leadership. Mm-hmm. Right? You in the early days had to lead Paradox mm-hmm. in a way that God was leading.
Yeah.
Right? And so talk about godly leadership in church planting. Why is that? Why does that? I know it sounds almost stupid to say, why does godly leadership matter?
Yeah.
But
from a multiplication perspective, and we can move away from that, but starting there, what are you multiplying? If we don't have godly leadership, what are we multiplying? If you don't have godly leadership, I don't think you have the concrete and rebar to build anything off of. It's going to fall apart very quickly. Sure. Obviously, we've seen that. My goodness, in the church in DFW in 2024 has just gotten. We've all seen too many guys fall just in my area. So, yeah, I mean, it's obviously 100% necessary. One of the best things about Acts 29 in the assessment process and all of that, just having that and being able to multiply that. You will, especially early on, especially the first couple of years when you're smaller, you will multiply yourself. You just are.
Right.
And I mean, I was thinking about, I don't think we've ever been amazing at developing leaders, not in like that Kevin Peck, I've got this great system kind of way of doing it.
Sure.
And so I was, even just flying here thinking about how I answer some of these questions around leadership. The best way, again, has just been, just being, it's just like parenting at home. It's presence, and it's setting a culture, and you're going to multiply that. And so if that isn't godly, and we can talk about what that means. What does that mean, godly? But if that isn't godly, then you're just going to be multiplying something else.
Right. Well, and you brought up Peck. So Peck and Geiger wrote this book,
right.
And they talk about these three aspects of this thing. Like you have to have conviction, and then there's kind of constructs, moves outward. Right. And I think there can sometimes be in church planting, like if I just get the techniques right.
Sure.
And there's practical things matter.
Yeah.
There's a difference between being practical and pragmatic, right?
Totally.
So, I mean, why not? There's all kinds of resources to be just tips and techniques.
Yeah.
So this gets to the godly pieces. Why does that foundation matter in leadership? Why not just go grab the next sermon series that worked for a guy, or the manual with the 18 steps?
Yeah. I mean, here's one answer to that question. What game are we actually playing? What is the scoreboard, and what is the win?
Yeah.
If the scoreboard is ministry success in the American mindset, in the American way of that phrase, ministry success, if the game we're playing is popular, big, butts and seats, then the win's going to be something completely different. But if the goal, and I think this is the goal, if there's anything we should have learned over the last 15 years in Acts 29 and in evangelicalism in America as pastors, the win is making it to the end. The win is making it to the end. The scoreboard is, how am I doing? Am I going to make it to the end? What quarter am I in? What's the score? How many fouls do I have? Do I have any timeouts left?
Yeah, you talk to older guys, and the more they say is, I'm realizing
I just want to make it to the end.
I want to make it faithful to my wife.
I mean,
and Jesus and my congregation.
That literally is the win. And I mean, I'll be 45. We'll be, we're not quite 15 years yet as a church. We're not even 14 quite yet. So I'm still young, but have enough behind me to know this. If we, I don't know who said it first, but we have a tendency to overestimate what we think we can accomplish in the long term, and we underestimate what the Lord can produce in us. We overestimate what we can do in the short term.
Yeah.
We underestimate all that the Lord can produce in us over the long haul. I could never have imagined in 13 years that God would have us be, this church that's planted has a family of almost now 7 churches, and have the number of people we have, and the baptisms, and the things I've been able to see and experience, the work, the fruit, the beautiful fruit that God has done. I never would have guessed He could have done that.
But that
in 14 years.
I mean, we just ate lunch together. We've been talking about. We sat here before we got on. We've been talking about this, and you all do something that we've done at our church, and it isn't just those things happen,
right?
Like they weren't random.
No,
they did. You didn't wait for them. Like,
no way.
You worked towards them. You were intentional.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about your strategy in terms of discipleship. Not just like, I don't mean small groups or that. I mean, you guys are in the middle of 2 years of you're leading the sheep somewhere.
Yeah.
And so tell me a little bit about that side of godly leadership, meaning, hey, I see where we need to go.
Yeah.
and how all that works for you guys.
Yeah, I think, it's leading with vision. I think it's unbelievably necessary. I think a lack of leading with vision, it can really, what I've seen from younger church planners and churches that have struggled to grow to a place where there's kind of that critical mass where they feel like they can begin to multiply and do some things. I think that's one of the big problems is a lack of leading with vision. I think people think about it's like we're not reinventing the wheel. I mean, we're all trying to make disciples and all of that. But I do think these little vision initiatives is what I've just always called them. Man, it's that thing where for this year, I think we need to grow in this. Man, we got to grow in this. We got to figure this part out.
Which is what you're doing is you're reading the culture
absolutely
as it is now.
Yeah.
Because you were telling me, like, when you guys planted, you were a bunch of young.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
all kinds of other issues then.
You were 24, 26, so everybody was 24, 26.
Yes.
And how has that shifted, and how is your church plant and maturing church, how are you continually reading that culture and then leading your church that way?
I think it's 1 Peter 5. It's shepherd the flock that's among you. So my call is to shepherd this flock that's among me.
Yep.
That flock has changed over the years because it does.
Yeah.
COVID, growth, church planting, college town, urban.
Sure.
It's going to change. And so, practically that looks like me getting away and praying through really what we've already observed and seen over the course of a year, and praying through that and kind of doing that. I think it's in Acts 13 where the apostles say it seemed good to us and the Holy Spirit to do this, and so I think in the same way. And so over the years we've said, man, we want to really grow in discipling the spiritual gifts. Let's figure out how to do that. That we're charismatic in theology. We have people that practice them, but we haven't shepherded them in what that looks like.
Right.
Man, let's grow in our spiritual disciplines. Our people really need to understand that a resilient faith is going to take this kind of, these kind of healthy rhythms. What does this look like to multiply healthy as a church? And so we've just over the years had these different vision initiatives where we try to grow in our prayer, grow in our evangelism, grow in this way or that. And so, we're about to start a 2-year vision initiative that's around the biggest piece that it's centered on is our families. We've typically historically been very young. Now we actually have some families, have some kids, and nobody knows how to do it. Nobody knows how to parent their kids. Nobody knows how to be a husband or a wife. Sure. And we've got some older people now that we haven't had before that can help to mentor and walk us through some of that. And so what does it look like, especially for the dads? I mean, all of the stats, we can go back to old school Mark, back 15 years ago. It's still true that dads in the home are unbelievably important for the sake of the kids' faith.
Yep.
And that sort of faith carrying on into young adulthood. And so what does it look like for our men to be a shepherd in the home and a pastor in the home? So we're doing a lot of focus there.
One of the things that I love, and I think this is really important to pastors of an existing church or as a church plant, is in what you're doing is you're not just looking at Fort Worth sort of from a macro level. You do that, and to go, well, this is Fort Worth generally.
Yeah.
What you're doing right now is you're going, that's true, but this is who we were when we planted in 2011. And by God's grace, you've grown, matured, changed, 100%. The congregation has, and you're continually watching the flock.
Yes.
And you're going, okay, so now, here's where we are now.
Yes.
And and so it's not a generic pastoring.
No. I mean, it's hard because we're largely Gen Z, we're largely single. But we've never had the kind of teaching in our church for the families because we just didn't have that many.
Yeah.
Now we have enough to where we got to teach them. We got to teach them. I want to learn. I want to grow in what it means to be a dad in the home. And so it is. It's always looking at your church, shepherding the flock among you. What does it look like to lead them? What is God calling us to right now?
Yeah. And I think that's so important because there can be a tendency in church planting to kind of be enamored with a model or a style or whatever it is, and then to try to emulate that thing.
Right.
And to learn from people's great. That's wonderful.
Right.
Do that.
Right.
But what I love what you guys are doing is going, no, we're not who we used to be.
Yeah.
And your role as a pastor is to watch that, keep an eye on it.
Yeah.
And then with your elders, okay, how do we get the sheep moving down the way?
Yeah. And I mean, it really goes to a lot, the temptation to not preach to your people, but preach to the sermon reel, to preach to the YouTube channel, to preach to the live stream. Things are so connected globally and through the internet. And we want to mime and mimic, our favorite preacher and pastor or the church that we want to try to adopt. Oh, they did it. Joby did it this way. Church of 1122 did it this way. Village Church did it this way. We should try that. And so there's so many temptations to not just look at your people, be who you are, seek the face of God. What do you want for us right now in this moment? And then move forward. I bet, and I've never really even thought much about this, but I bet if you grabbed, 5 sermons from somebody's church podcast and listened to them, I probably could tell you how they think and act and do this kind of thing by just listening to them. Because here's what I've noticed. The guys that actually preach to their people talk to their people. Like they're talking about my city and our people and you. And so I was talking to, partner Bob who did this, and like they're preaching to their people and not in this kind of generic way.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important.
Yeah. So let's shift a little bit and talk about spiritual vitality.
Come on.
And the importance of that over time in pastoring and in planting. And so just to kind of back up and think about it is what is spiritual vitality? I mean, we have spiritual vitality, we have spiritual maturity. Those things are similar and they feed one another, but how are they different? Where do they cross over?
Yeah, I mean, I think of spiritual vitality as, there's spiritual life. There's a spiritual heartbeat. There is, there's some energy and excitement and encouragement around somebody's spiritual life. Whereas spiritual maturity is, man, there's deep roots here. And this thing's going to bear fruit every year. Some years might be a bigger harvest than others, but it can withstand some droughts and it can withstand some winds. It's not going to just blow over just like that. And so that's kind of how I would distinguish those two things. And so spiritual vitality is, I think it's, if number one on our kind of core competency is actually 9.
Yeah.
It's up the top. Because it's the thing that we ask every potential staff hire. It's the thing that we ask every potential church planter.
Yeah.
I say ask. It's the thing we're trying to figure out. What does that look like? What does their spiritual vitality look like? How is that expressed? Their affections for Jesus? Is there a regular repentance? Is there the spiritual rhythms? Is that in place? What's their prayer life like? Where are they at in terms of just a joyfulness? I think spiritual vitality is expressed in joy. Like if we're talking about just crotchety old, Calvinist guy, I don't know. I mean, as John Piper said something to the effect of, you can't have great, some people have great Calvinist theology, but they never sing. It's like, that's not.
And of all the theologies, theologies, that one should make you joyful.
Yeah, then that's not theology.
Right.
And so I think spiritual vitality is it's obviously foundational to what we're doing. And just think about, that can be so deceived. Like we can easily, and I don't know that if you're self-deceived, I don't know if you're going to be able to find that out. So I'm mainly talking to those who would assess, those who would consider, those who would be discerning a leader, a church planter, or someone in their spiritual vitality. That takes a little bit of like, I'm near the sheep. I'm really, I'm around a little bit. I'm talking with the wife. I need some time with them. I mean, even think about elders. When you're making elders, what does that look like? Because man, spiritual vitality, without that, you can say the right words. You can listen to the right podcasts. You can be incredibly gifted. I mean, you can be King Saul.
Yeah.
And if the Spirit's gone, the Spirit's gone.
And it's there are things that will be evident to have spiritual vitality and spiritual maturity. Like
Tell me that. What do you think?
Like nobody's become nobody has a living, vibrant relationship with Jesus without being in the Word.
What do you think wouldn't be there?
Well, I mean, how do you grow in Jesus if you aren't regularly in the Word of God? But what I was going to say was, just because you're in the Word of God doesn't mean you're going to have a vibrant relationship.
Totally, exactly.
Right? So the outward action to what you're getting at is,
that's why
it has to be there, but it doesn't.
And it's hard to measure it because it's like, Adam, are you joyful? You know, I have to watch you for a little while.
Sure.
And I don't know. Some people might not think I'm very joyful. I'm just intense. So you know what I mean? Like it's not as easy to address, but I think it's vitally important.
So what goes wrong? What's a danger in pastoring, or maybe specifically in planting?
Yeah.
If you as the pastor don't have spiritual vitality.
So I mean, I'll tell you where I see it in my life. When sermon prep becomes laborious. And maybe laborious isn't the right word, because I think it is. I mean, it is work, but when it's like I do not want to do this.
Drudgery, yeah.
I do not want to do this. That's a red flag. I'm getting tired. You know, when my crabbiness at home goes from a 4 to a 6. You know, when my creative energy is really low. There's a lack of spiritual vitality, and I mean, you could say, well, that sounds like burnout. Yeah. I mean,
you'll get there.
Hard, yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's hard to be spiritually vital when you're burned out. That's why we have a Sabbath. That's why there's So I do think there's a lot of similarities between like just I think I'm tired. I think I'm burning out, and that spiritual vitality.
Yeah. And
so that's why it's so important. I mean, the guys that have fallen, it's the slow, progressively, distance from the Lord because of the work, and they're not willing to rest, and they're not, all those kind of things. Sure. So, yeah.
And I mean, you talked about sermons. It's when you don't have that personal spiritual vitality, it feels like sermons can go towards, well, let me just tell you some information.
Absolutely.
And it starts to lack the personal transformation.
Yeah.
In sort of the doxological nature of a sermon. Like maybe it's a warning sign. Like if your sermons are not working you over, perhaps there's some stuff on the other side of it.
It's 100% true. I had it somewhat like that. I had a church member, she's blind, say to me, she said, you haven't told us you love us in a while. I would unknowingly tell my people I love them at the end after my closing prayer. And she's like, it's been a while. And I was like, dang.
Uh-oh.
Wow. Why?
Right.
Why haven't I, And so I think there are those little signs, those little things, those tells that, have I connected with the sermon? Have I connected with the sermon in a long time? Have I wept in my sermon prep in the last 3 months? Are
you responding at the end of a service? Like if you're singing and you're calling your people, are you down there?
Right. Exactly. 100%. Those are all.
Or is that for everybody else?
Exactly. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So there's the other aspect of like the congregation in some respects, it doesn't depend on you ultimately.
Right.
But as you go, you should expect the congregation to be going.
Yeah.
And so,
I mean, Jesus said that the student's not greater than the teacher.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so if you're not having this living, vital relationship with Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good luck. I mean, you'll replicate that.
Yeah. And I'll say this also as like encouragement. We've experienced many gospel revival at our church in the last couple of years, specifically last year. There's a 3-month period where it just felt like there's something unique, something really sweet about this. And something that I had to confess to the Lord even this summer was, I want that again, but it feels unsustainable. It feels, there was the Lord just gave us this yearning for more of Him,
Right.
and this seeking and fasting and praying, and I was like, I don't know if I could do that again. I mean, I can, just maybe not yet.
Yeah, I can't sprint
Right.
constantly.
So I do want to, I think this is one of those things. It's like we want to tell our people to go, hear from the Lord and obey the Lord, but then that can get crazy.
Right.
This could get crazy, but I do want us to hear. I want church leaders, I want pastors to be able to hear from God and just let the Lord lead you into, give you permission to be who you're supposed to be in a particular season or moment.
Yeah.
I feel like there is times where God has said, Jim, I want you to seek after me hard, seek my face in a way that prayer, fasting, I want to do something. And then I think there's been times where He said, hey, it's okay to just kind of chill for a sec, just rest. And doesn't mean I'm not praying or anything like that.
Sure.
Just there's a level of intensity that I feel like He's called me to, and then there's times where He hasn't. So I think spiritual vitality, it's not so much those inputs, it's the outputs. It's not so much, it's not always going to look the same if I'm not, doing my Bible reading plan 7 days a week for 30 minutes every morning, then I'm not spiritually vital.
So what are a couple of those things for you?
Yeah.
Like, what's that look like? Just sort of
so my
daily rhythms, things like that, whatever.
I'll give you some of the normal ones, but here's one that I thought would be helpful because I love going to my church.
Yeah.
I feel like I need Sunday morning just as much as my people need Sunday morning.
Absolutely.
And I love it. We have 3 services. We sing, whatever, 4 or 5 songs each service. Obviously, I sing every word of every song of every service. Mm-hmm. And I love it. And I'm encouraged by my people, and my family takes the Lord's Supper together, and the body encourages me and prays for me. And I am that rhythm of Sundays has been so good for my soul. It really does. It can do
and
wonders.
I love that you're like, I'm here.
Yeah. I love going to my church.
I'm a sheep in this thing
Yes.
before I'm a shepherd.
Yes.
And
love going to my church. My wife and I wake up most mornings together and read our Bibles together, and then take the big old dog on a walk before the kids get up.
do you guys like sit at the breakfast table and like
We
read
don't
out
talk.
loud together?
No, we don't
or-
talk.
Yeah.
No. We don't
We've
talk.
never, Kristen and I have never been good at like that thing. I mean, we try to read the same thing, so we're kind of on the same page.
Right.
But
Yeah.
we've never been able to sit down and read it out loud.
No, and to be fair,
like that.
half of those days I'm coming down about 15 minutes later than she is already down there and starting to make the kids breakfast. No, I mean that's been such a huge part of my wife's spiritual growth and vitality, and then mine as well.
I do think though, and this is really important, what you're touching on, and I've experienced some of this, is a husband and a wife growing together in spiritual vitality. Yeah. And I know it's not always the same. And that's why God compliments and puts you together and uses all that. But the fact that you guys are reading those things together, I'm sure it sparks conversations at other points. And, I read this, I heard this. And so you're tracking with each other along the way. And,
Yeah, I mean, date nights for us are huge. That's a marital rhythm, but I feel like it's a spiritual rhythm too.
Yeah.
And what's new this year for me is prayer walks. I just do a lot of prayer walking, and that's been a wonderful, wonderful rhythm. That's almost a keystone habit. Like it other habits kind of flow from that, and it affects my physical, mental, emotional, relational, and spiritual life.
Is prayer for you a thing that is like a gift from God? Like it just kind of flows, or is it something you've had to work at?
I've had to work so hard. Yeah, I feel like I'm terrible at it. I think a lot. I do a lot of internal processing and thought. My mind, my mind's always going. And so I think a lot. I've had to try to train myself to, like, every once in a, it's like every 5 minutes of thinking, I've got to say Jesus, and just keep directing those thoughts to the Lord. But that's why prayer walking has been really good. I have to be active in my prayer. My mind begins to wander. So I'm not great at sitting down. My Bible study, my quiet time is about 15 minutes. I can't sit much longer. And so I love prayer walking. That's just been really, really good. And then if I'm not, I've really grown in prayer through on my knees, praying on my knees. Read The Common Rule back in 2018-19 when Justin came out with that book, and one of his things was praying on your knees, and I love the physicality of that.
Yeah, put your body in a position that your heart and mind and all has to focus.
Exactly. So if I'm praying, I'm going to pray best, whatever that means, on my knees or walking.
Yeah. Absolutely. How about not just kind of on a daily rhythm, but are there some things that you build into your year to stoke that spiritual vitality for you? And
I take a good bit of preaching off in the summer, and that is so necessary. So that's one thing that's just kind of always been there. I'm talking about at least 4, if not 5 to 6 weeks in a row, no preaching. So
you start to get itchy to want to get back
terrible. It's terrible. Yes. Yes. But it's so very necessary. And that's for me. I don't know what everybody else's preaching schedule is like. I will go 8 weeks in a row, even 10 sometimes, depending on how something might work out. So I do long sprints, and then I'll take a long break. It's kind of like anything. You have to, as hard as you exert, you have to that much hard recover. And so that's always been really good. It's a good rhythm for our family. And then I really do think the rhythm that we have around, so how we lead our staff each year starts with me and our chairman of the elders and my executive pastor getting away and beginning to flesh out a kind of half-baked plan that I have for the year. And then we take that to the elders and then to the exec team and to the staff. That excites me. That's a spiritual rhythm because it excites me for what the Lord is doing. A lot of that work that we do is looking at what God has done. Who has the Holy Spirit brought? Who has he taken away? What does it seem like he's doing? What are some things that are hindering us, keeping us? Those things excite me. Jesus stands in the midst of the churches, the 7 churches in Revelation 2 and 3. Jesus is involved intimately with our churches. And so even some of that planning really, it is spiritually, there's some spiritual vitality even associated with that.
How much, you mentioned elders, how involved are the elders kind of in your life and not just the functions of the church?
Sure.
Like how much are they're kind of shepherding you as you lead this thing together?
Yeah.
Do they play a role in that spiritual vitality for you?
Absolutely. So I meet at least once a month with our chairman of the elders. He's a lay elder, obviously, and one of my closest friends, and been just super faithful. And he's just, everybody needs a Pastor Seth. Everybody needs the guy that cares more about you than who you are, to the organization. He's so unassuming. He's so just sweet, but 100% trustworthy. We'll call up my wife and check on her as well. So he's a godsend. And I think every church planter, every lead pastor needs to have a lay elder that cares for him, like Seth does.
Yeah. And I guess I hear from you, it's not like he's just checking up on you.
No.
Like, are you, we got to watch the church and make sure Jim's not getting out of line. It sounds like he's for you and for Heather and for your kids. And
you got built-in trust for years and years and years there. So, and then, Matt, my worship pastor, who's been with me for 10 years, the best shepherd I know, he's just the best. And then James, my XP, Dr. Ryan, Pastor Ryan has been at the church for 15 years, pastor only these past couple, but just know that these men care for me. They'll do anything for us. Pastor Brian just is a prayer warrior. Has prayed over my wife and just so we have men that we trust and men that are really good to us. Yeah. We also have great friendships. But that, I'll just say that took years. That's not the first 5, 6, 7 years weren't that great. Weren't that in terms of friendships, relationships. My wife's got young kids. I mean, all of that is hard. So all this other stuff, the relational stuff takes time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, we'll shut it down.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for making the trip in. I'm thrilled you're part of the network. I love what you're doing in Fort Worth and Plant Fort Worth and the way you guys are multiplying out churches. And I can't wait for, Sin's out now.
Yeah.
When everybody hears this, it's out. And so, I mean, go to Amazon, go to all the places, get it, buy it, give it, use it as a resource, do sermon series on it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm so excited for this tool that you've helped create and been a part of. And I think it's really going to serve our network and really, really well. So thanks so much. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Acts 29 podcast. If you want to connect with Acts 29 or find out more about planting a church with Acts 29, you can go to acts29.com. Go ahead and hit like on the podcast and don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss an episode. Thanks again for joining us.